this project, we looked at the bits of an awesome 78mm model. We washed it, prepped it, built it, broke it, built it again. So in this video, I'm going to get confused about painting marble. I'm going to be painting in a non-metallic style, but using metallic paints. And also, I'm going to paint the Greek god of war like a smurf. Why? Let's go play with some paint. So looking at what I've done so far, having built it, now I've primed it in a dark grey using a mix of a Vallejo light grey and a black Mecha primer. I've then given it a zenithal spray using a white ink. So having had a look at the main warrior sub-assembly, now one thing that's really handy by doing the zenithal spray is that you can see where your shadow is going to be a lot easier. Also, I wanted to try and make it as historically accurate as I could, and strangely enough, there's not many colour reference photos of Spartan warriors. But at times like this, Google is your friend. Right, okay, so I've got a bit of a plan in my head of what I'm going to do. Onto the base. Now my first thoughts was to do this kind of like the vein marble. Is that right for ancient Greece? Actually, looking at these reference photos, it's quite a warm, sandstony sort of colour. Okay, let's see if I can do that instead. So having seen those reference photos, yes, it's quite a warm, sandstony colour, but it's got lots of different hues. It's got sort of reds and a little bit of greens and in there as well. So first of all, I'm going to put a layer of a kind of beige down. Now I'm going to use quite a thin layer because that will then take advantage of the zenithal spray, kind of the shadows showing through as I'm painting it. And while it's still wet, I'm going to add some terracotta into the mix and blend that into that beigey colour. Now looking at the shield, I want it to obviously be kind of a metallic-y, bronzy kind of colour, but I don't want it to be too shiny because then it's going to detract the eye from the main figure. But from a narrative point of view, it's half buried in the ground, so it's not going to be looking its best anyway. But looking for the colours of this, I found this reference photo online, and I really like that battered, bronzy, brown kind of effect that it's got. I'll try and replicate that on this. First of all, I'm going to paint this in a retributor gold, and then I'm going to mix in some dark brown from Vallejo into that retributor gold on the palette, and that will dull it right down and give it that battered look, but also kind of using some of the techniques you might use within non-metallic metal to get the shadows and the highlights in there. Let's have a go and see how it works. Onto the ground part of the base. Now first of all, I've put a thin layer of Humbrol model filler on to try and fill in the gaps to make those pillars sink into the ground a little bit. I've given it a thin once over with the dark brown, and now it's time to go over it with this desert yellow from Tamiya. So looking at it, it's not quite how I want it, but also amateur mistake, because I put the putty on when the shield was not in place yet. The idea being so I could paint behind the shield. The shield does not fit properly now. So what I'm going to do is grab the milliput and mix up a little bit, and then I'm going to use the tool to force it into the hole where the shield is going to sit. Now this also, because it's quite sticky and it takes a while to cure, it will also act like glue and it will hold the shield really well. So once I've done that, I'm then going to put the shield in place and build that putty up around the shield to make it look like it's half buried in the soil. Fairly happy with that. I'm going to let that dry. Now once it's completely dry, I'm then going to go over it with the Tamiya Desert Sand. As far as the base goes, I'm going to pause there on that, I think, because the next bit is going to be the weathering, and I want to put everything together first so I can see how the whole composition works together before I start doing that sort of detail. Now onto the warrior. When it comes to the main skin, I'm going to try something a bit different. Now I've seen this technique used by some amazing artists. Now when I've seen it before, it's normally been using oils, but I'm going to try and see if I can replicate this by using these acrylics. Now the first step of this technique is to really thin down a blue paint and to go over the skin areas. I know he's starting to look a bit like a smurf, but just stick with me. So the next phase of this technique is almost giving it a zenithal highlight but with a beige and blending that in with the blue. And the general idea is that that forms the base underlayer for the skin, and then you go over the top of that with warmer tones in your palette, which we'll come to in a minute, and that starts to give a much more realistic and lifelike effect. That's the idea anyway. We'll see how this one works. Now the next phase is I'm going to use a mix of the Vallejo Model Air Rust, which is kind of a darky, reddy kind of browny colour, and the Vallejo Model Air Wood, which is a darker yellow colour. Now I'm going to mix these on the palette to create more of a flesh tone, and mixing a bit of beige as well to get a gradient from the darker shadowy areas through to the highlight. I'm also going to give a little dash of blue into it as well. And I'm then going to thin these down with water, so it's creating a glaze to go over that. And the idea is I keep building up the colours, adding in a little bit more beige, a little more darker red, a little shade more blue in certain areas to build up the skin tones in all the different areas I've got going across the model. That's the idea. It's the first time I've used it on this sort of model, so let's see how it works. At the minute it's looking quite cold, so I'm going to add a bit more of that kind of rusty red in there to add a bit of warmth into the skin. Now I'm going to deliberately leave some of the areas that are in shadow, or areas that I don't want the eye to linger on. I want to leave them much more of a muted and more of a greyer type colour. A, because the colour then gives it a bit more perspective, also makes the areas that I put the highlights more attractive to the eye and it pops out a bit more. So yeah, this technique takes quite a long time to do, but I'm really quite liking the effect it's coming out with. If you're enjoying it too, please like and share as always. Now I've blocked out the leather work in a dark brown, I'm going to go back in and add some beige into the brown mix and start pulling up the highlights on this leather. I wanted the bow itself to be more woody colour, but if I did the bowstring as a dark brown as well, there's a risk of the whole thing getting lost in the background. We'll see how it works out, but my logic is to do the bowstring in a lighter beigey kind of colour. So the idea, it kind of draws the eye to that part and you recognise it, he's holding a bow. So now I want to start doing some work on the plume. And yeah, the obvious one you think of is red or black. The thing is there's a lot of red on this model already, and if I paint it black it'll just kind of fade into the background. I quite like the idea of the yellow and black one, so I'm going to try that. Now yellow could be a difficult colour to paint at the best of times, but also I want it to look like horsehair. So the idea is I want it to look darker at the base where it's the thickest and most compact, and then lighter and more airy when it gets to the top. So first of all I'm going to paint the entire thing in this orange colour and try and put a darker, more denser colour towards the base nearest the helmet. Well, okay, while that's drying I'm now going to move on to the armour. Now I quite like the effect we got on the shield, but I want to make it brighter and more metallic and more eye-catching. So first of all I'm going to block it out with a Retributor armour, which is a dark gold colour from Citadel. Now at the minute it's looking very orangey, very yellow, and this is kind of part of the reason why I wanted the alternate black and yellow in the plume to help break it up a little bit and add a bit more interest. On the armour itself and on the helmet and the sword, I'm now going to add in that dark brown from Vallejo and mix it in. So I'm going to try and almost use a modified non-metallic metal kind of technique, and I'm going to try and paint in the shadows and paint in the highlights and not rely on the metallic properties of the paint. So what's quite handy is that my light source is roughly the same angle that I put my zenithal highlight in. So therefore I'm going to use the natural shadows and basically paint that darker goldy kind of colour in where the natural shadows are. So therefore wherever I have my light source in the future, it will still read correctly. And also I can look where the highlights are naturally and then use a lighter colour to put in those highlights in there. That's the theory anyway. We'll see how it works. Right, so for the highlights I'm going to use the gold colour from the Vallejo Model Air Metallic range. If you're using this on its own, it normally takes a good couple of coats to get good coverage, but it is a really nice coverage once it's done. Right, so back to the plume. So I want to use a nice bright colour, so I'm going to use the yellow from the Vallejo Model Air range to start building up the yellow colour in the plume. So with the black part of the plume, I don't want to have it completely jet black, A, because it will read as very black plastic, but also nothing's naturally completely black. So I'm going to use a dark grey for starters and kind of build it up. It also means that I can put a lighter elements towards the top, so where the plume is thinner and more airy, it will give that impression that you can almost see daylight coming through the tips of the plume. So having used that dark grey, I'm now going to go back with a black and thicken it up in certain places. Yeah, quite happy with that. Right, now to put it all together. So I'm now going to try and tie the base together a little bit. I'm going to use this Tamiya Weathering Master Set A to therefore try and tie the various parts of the base together. I've got to say, I've really enjoyed this project. If you're enjoying it too, please like and share as always. And if you want to give this project a go for yourself, I'll put a link for you down in the description so you can go and check it out. So what have I learned from this? One, I tried some techniques I've never done before. I've never used the metallic paints like I have done today. I've never tried to paint skin tones on models like this before in this way. I've been really pleased with it. I've really enjoyed it, and especially with the skin tones. I've really enjoyed that. I found different ways of painting it absolutely fascinating. So yeah, I think I'm definitely going to have to do some more work on that topic. But that is for another video.